Hello, and welcome back to another Hammar's Art Studio paint-along tutorial. My name is Sam, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, we'd like to ask you if you wouldn't mind subscribing, liking, and maybe sharing this video with your family and friends. It would really help us out a lot. Today, we are going to be painting along to our Howling at the Moon painting here, featuring a wolf inspired by Disney's Zombies 2. Before we start painting, I'd like to go over all of our supplies that we're going to need today. So I'm going to start out with our paint. Now your paint is going to be in some little Ziploc bags, so you'll need a pair of scissors to get into those rather than opening up the Ziploc. It's going to be easier for you to clip the little, one of the little corners and squeeze out your paint. I just have mine on a half paper plate here. We recommend that it's one of the wax coated ones, that way the paint won't soak into your plate. So I'm going to go over all of our colors to begin with. We're going to be starting out today with these three over here: our white, our fluorescent pink, and our fluorescent green. You can also pull out your gray color here. It's called a primer gray, and the purple, which is referred to as dioxane purple or violet. We're going to leave the black in our bag for now. We only need just the littlest bit at the end, so rather than drying out, we're going to let it sit in the bag and stay nice and wet. We're also going to need several different size brushes. We're going to start out today with our large flat background brush. We have two round brushes. We'll probably want to use both of those. And we'll use a really little teeny tiny brush. That will be great for the details, especially in the wolf's face and ears later on. So I'm going to set those to the side for now. We'll also need a cup of water for rinsing our brushes when it's time. We'll want a rag or some kind of paper towel maybe. This will be great for drying off our brushes after we clean them in the water. We'll also need a pencil. We're going to need a full-size paper plate. And you'll want to pull this tracing paper out of your little to-go box. It's got the wolf already traced onto it, but we will need to take our pencil and very carefully on the reverse side, which is the side that I'm showing you right now, opposite the wolf, right? You're going to want to take your pencil and very carefully shade right along that whole entire line. And you'll see why when we get to that in a little while. I'm just going to set it to the side for the time being. You'll want your canvas out in front of you. If you don't have an easel, that's okay. I'll be painting a little bit flat on the countertop here today as well. But we recommend having some sort of easel to prop it up. It'll just make it a little bit easier in the long run. So to begin with today, we are going to take that full-size paper plate that I just showed you, and we're going to want to put our paint to the side so we don't get that all over the place. We're going to take our canvas and lay it flat in front of us, and we're going to take that paper plate, probably flip it upside down so it's a little bit flatter, and we're going to put that right about here, about an inch or two down from the top of your canvas. Try to keep it right in the center. That'll make sure that your moon looks nice and full. I'm going to take my pencil and very, very lightly, that's a key thing here. We don't want the graphite to be too heavy on our canvas. It actually loves the canvas. Graphite loves canvas, which is a really silly thing to say, but it gets absorbed into the canvas and it makes it really tricky, especially since we're using really light colors today to get rid of that graphite. It might end up smearing and turning your moon more gray than you want it to be. So I'm going to very, very lightly trace the outline of my paper plate, just like this. All right, perfect. So I'm going to leave that paper plate to the side. If you haven't already pulled your paints out, you could use this for your paints. So I'm going to put that back up into my easel for now as I explain our next step. So we're going to pull our paint forward. This next step is going to be a little bit tricky to see. We're going to want to take our large flat brush and we're going to use some white. Now this is going to be tricky to see, right? Because we're putting white paint onto a white canvas. So just keep track of where you put the paint. It's going to be pretty simple because we're going to start by outlining our moon and then filling it in. For this step, I think I'm going to take it out of the canvas, out of the easel, put it flat on my countertop, just so that I can make sure I get right within the circle. If you go outside of the lines a little bit, don't worry. We're going to be blending some of those pinks and green colors into the outline of the moon to give it sort of this little halo effect. Make it look a little bit more mysterious and spooky, like Halloween. You can kind of cover up that graphite line just a little bit. You'll still be able to see it underneath your white paint. And then make sure that you fill in the moon entirely. We don't want any spots of dry canvas left within the moon. You might not notice it now, but once it starts to dry, you'll really notice all of those little dots and holes in the canvas if you don't get paint inside of them. Alright, so that looks pretty good to me. It's not going to be very easy to see, right? Because it's white on white, as I said before, but that's okay. I'm going to just dry a little bit of the extra white on my brush off on my rag. I don't need to get it wet. So then it's up to you what you'd like to start with first, the pink side or the green side. I think today I'm going to start with the pink. So I'm going to take my brush. Like I said, if there's a little bit of white on there, that's okay. We're going to be blending a little. Now we don't want to come too far over to the right side of our canvas here, right? If you're looking at it this way. We don't want to come over too far into where the green is because pink and green, when they mix, it's not the nicest color. It kind of turns brown. So we want to make sure we keep those colors nice and separate as best that we can. So I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom and just start sweeping in a semicircle around the edge of that canvas there. I'm going to put it back up in my easel so it might be a little easier to see now that we have some color going. If you'd like to make it a little bit more hazy, a little bit more mystical, you could take a little extra white on your brush and you'll get some nice streakiness going on in there as well. Be really careful coming around the edge of your moon. I'm going to use the skinny part of my brush so that I can go right up along that edge. And you'll notice as I drag my brush through the white that we left behind, it starts to get nice and streaky. See that there? Just like that, right to the edges. And we want to kind of make our line in the middle here. Now I'm wrapping that pink right up around the side of the moon, the edge of the moon. Maybe I'll just put my line on top here as well so I can give myself a good stopping point. Just using some of the extra paint on my brush to fill in some of my white areas before going back to get some more. As I said, this can be nice and streaky. It doesn't have to be super, super smooth, blended together, right? We could have a little bit of streakiness in there. Make it look a little cloudier. Make sure if you're using an easel, you lift up this little tab at the top so that you can get all the way to the top of the canvas. Alright, perfect. That's looking really good. I'm now going to take my brush and we can get it nice and clean. Like I said, we don't want to mix the green and the pink. For this next step, I am going to take my canvas back out of the easel so I don't have to reach all the way across it. And so you'll still be able to see it. So now that my brush is nice and clean, I'm going to dry it off. We want to make sure we dry our brushes really, really well. See how I've got my rag flat in my hand and I'm kind of just brushing it back and forth, maybe up and down a little bit, side to side. The reason that we want to do this is because the paint we're using today is acrylic, and now acrylic paint, the reason that we can clean it with water is because it is water soluble, which means that acrylic paint will dissolve in water. So if we have a bunch of water on our brush and we go to put it on our canvas, we could end up with a bunch of streaky paint drips, which might look neat in another project, but not when we're trying to focus on the sky. So as I said, I'm gonna pull this down. This may make it easier for you as well at home so that we don't end up getting too streaky with the green into the pink. It'll help control our brush a little bit better. So now, same kind of idea, I'm gonna take just a little bit of white and lay that down first. I'm thinking the edge of the moon on this side has started to dry since we put it in there. There we go. Again, dry off the brush just a little bit and go in with that bright green. As I said before, be really careful coming up next to the pink here on the edge. If there's a little bit of white left, that's okay. We can kind of go in after it's dry and pull that back a little bit. And down near the bottom, it doesn't matter quite so much because we'll be filling it in with trees and with our wolf. Just very carefully, same kind of idea as with the pink. Going right around the edge of the moon, maybe picking up a little extra white as I go. I'm making mine a little bit lighter than in the sample you see here next to me. I think it'll look a little bit nicer on camera. And I think the brightness will be really, really nice. It'll be a really cool contrast between the hot pink and the really neon green. So I'd say that's about good for now. I'm going to put my brush right in the water. We can leave it there for now. We're not really going to be using it too much for the rest of our painting event. So I'm gonna set this aside to dry in my easel. I'm gonna set my paint aside as well. And we can pull back out that tracing paper. So you can go ahead, take your pencil, and go right around those lines. We want to shade along the entirety of the outline of the wolf, the inside of the ears, the eye, everything. So on one side you should have Sharpie, and on the other side should be graphite. Now we're going to take just a couple of minutes to let this dry. We want to make sure our canvas is completely dry before we start adding in our trees. So I'm going to flip a fan on, step aside for a couple of minutes, and I advise you guys to do the same. We'll be right back. All right, we are back. My canvas is nice and dry. Hopefully yours is as well at home. Our next step that we're going to do is our purple trees. So I'm going to take both of my small and medium-sized round brushes. I'm gonna set those to the side for now. I think we're going to start off with our little one, and we may end up just sticking to this one. I think it'll make our trees a little bit skinnier and a little bit more ghostly. So we're going to take some more of our white that we set aside and make sure we don't use all of our white for this step either. And we're going to take some of our purple and we're going to just lightly mix them together. Now what I mean by that is that you should still see some white and still see some purple. I'm going to hold it up so you can kind of see right where my fingers are. It's gonna make kind of a light purple, but we wanna make sure, like I said, we're not mixing all those colors together. It'll make our trees a little bit more dimensional, a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to start painting in my trees. I think I'll start on the pink side again, since I know that side is definitely dry. I always like to start my trees at the top so that we don't end up making them too wide near the bottom and then having them come all the way up off the top of the canvas, and then all of a sudden our whole painting is just trees. So I'm going to pick a good spot to start. I think right here is a great spot for the first tree. Now I'm going to turn this just a little bit. It's easier for me, but hopefully you'll still be able to see. So I'm going to take the tip of my brush and start dotting. And as I dot, I want to come down on either side a little bit more and a little bit more. And that's going to start building in your trees. I'm going to take a little bit more white so that I don't end up making it too transparent, so that you want to be able to see a little bit of pink behind the trees, but not too much. A little background. And as I come towards the edge of my canvas, I'm just gonna let that tree go right off the edge. I don't want to make it too wide because we still want to fit at least one more tree on this side. And I want to pull that purple all the way to the bottom. I'm gonna go back up a little bit higher with some more dark purple. Just sort of layering, tapping and layering. It's very repetitive, kind of relaxing, right? Can give it a little bit more texture by going straight down instead of using the side of your brush. Take a little extra white, give it some nice highlights, some nice shadows. I'm gonna make sure right to the edge of my canvas, right on that little curve as it comes around the side of your canvas board. Stretcher bars. There we go. Right down to the bottom as well, so we don't leave any space at the bottom there. And our first tree is finished. I'll turn it a little bit more towards the front so you can see there. Nice. Now for the next tree, as I said, I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller, and I think really I'm just going to add just the top. As you can see in our sample here, I'll move these brushes. So you can see in our sample here, there's just a little bit of tree sticking up above the wolf's ear. So I think I'll just add that in and not waste any extra paint. So to do that, I'm going to pick another spot, probably right about here. And for the other trees, we will want to connect them, as you can see over here on this side, near the bottom. But with this one, like I said, since we're just going to be adding our wolf in, we just want to pull it down enough that when we line our tracing paper up, it'll sit right on top of the ear. So I'm gonna just very carefully add this little tree in. Little teeny tiny tree. There we go. I think that's good. Maybe a little lower, just to make sure. If we go too low, that's okay as well, because we'll be able to cover over any of the purple with our gray and our white when we get to the wolf. Now, as I did for the green side before, I'm going to have to pull my canvas out of my easel again. But since I showed you how to do the other side, hopefully you'll be able to follow right along. So, same kind of idea. I think I'm going to start all the way over on the side of the canvas. And I'm going to make this tree a little bit smaller, a little shorter than the first one that I did on the other side. Again, we want to make sure we've got a little bit of purple and a little bit of white on our brush as we go in and start working this in. And you know what? I'm actually finding it a little easier to paint these trees flat on the counter. So maybe you might want to pull your canvas out of your easel if you're using an easel and do that as well. It's giving me a little more control over my brush strokes, I'm finding. You can make some of your branches a little bit spookier and longer like that. Kind of just use the very tip of your brush to pull out a little bit further. You could add some onto the other side as well, so they match a little bit more. Just like that. And we're going to add 3 trees into this side. So make sure you leave enough room. We're not going to kick out any of those trees. If your trees end up being a little too big, that's okay, just add 2 of them. That's my suggestion. You want to make sure that you have plenty of white on your brush, because one thing that acrylic paint does often is dry darker than it appears when it's wet. So if you don't want really, really, really dark, deep purple trees, add a little extra white. Now I'm going to start my next one. This one's going to be even smaller. I'm going to flip it around so you can see right where I'm going to start it. Now I don't want to put it right next to this tree because it'll get lost, so I'm going to come over and put it right here. I think that's a good place. And start working it down. As I said, as you get closer to the first tree that you put in on this, on this side, you want to start very carefully pulling them together. What I mean by that, do you see how I've got that little line as I'm starting to sort of pull these trees into the same one, like they're layered right one next to another? Alright, I'm down to the bottom on that one. And now we'll add our final tree in. This one's going to be even smaller. If it's really far away, or just a little teeny tiny tree. Right down to the bottom of the canvas. I'm going to make sure I get this side as well. I see some pink left behind. All right, that looks good to me, so I'm going to put it back in my easel so you all can see. And we'll need to wait again for a couple of minutes for these colors that we just added in to dry. So again, I'm gonna flip my fan on, take a little break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes to add in our wolf. Alright, we're back again. My trees are nice and dry, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our wolf. So I'm going to lay my canvas flat on my countertop again. I'm going to pull out my tracing paper that we now have a good coat of graphite on the back. And I'm going to lay that down, center it so that it fits right in between our trees like we planned. So something like that. Perfect. Awesome, so I'm going to now take my pencil again and very carefully go around all of our lines, just like we did on the back. So I think I'll start down near the bottom. You want to make sure that if any graphite gets on the side of your hand as you're going around, that you don't get any smudged onto the edge of your canvas. So just be careful. Awesome. So I'm just going to double check before I take it all the way off that I've gotten all my lines traced in. To do that, I like to take just 1 or 2 fingers near the top and very carefully peel from the bottom. And it looks like I've got all of mine, but if you missed any at home, I would suggest just very carefully laying it back down the same exact way that you picked it up, and you can finish tracing if you need to. But mine looks all set, so I'm going to pull my tracing paper off, set that to the side. And now you can see you've got your wolf, a nice little light outline in graphite so that it's a lot easier to fill in. We use this trick a lot in our art classes, in our art camps, sometimes even in our drawing classes. And you might be thinking, well, isn't that cheating a little bit? We like to think of it this way. You wouldn't ride a bike without using training wheels first, right? So these are kind of like artist training wheels. So I'm going to go ahead and take that same brush that we were using for our trees out of my water. I'm going to make sure it's nice and clean, nice and dry. But this time we can also take out that medium-sized one I thought we might use for the trees. We'll definitely use it for the wolf. So the next color we're going to use is our primer gray. We're going to start by putting a nice coat of primer down to cover up any of the colors, especially down in the bottom. It'll be pretty easy to fill it in for the moon, right? But we want to make sure we have a nice coat of this really covering gray color. It'll really help us to add our white tone on top of it without any of that pink, green, or purple from underneath really coming through. So I'm gonna go ahead and take, like I said, my small or medium size, I guess, round brush. And I'm just going to start outlining and filling in. I'll probably outline with my smaller one and fill in with my larger one. So you guys can go ahead and do that as well. This will act as a nice base coat for our white. It'll give it some depth, some extra contrast. It'll make it look a little bit more realistic, a little bit more like fur. So as I'm outlining, I'm also filling in simultaneously so we don't end up with an edge around that thick paint that we're putting on. It's probably a little too thick, so we want to spread it out. It'll help it dry more quickly. It won't be as lumpy. Be a little smoother. If you have a lot of extra paint like I do right here on the edge, you can pull some of that onto your brush and use it in another place. So that way we're not wasting any paint, and we're using up any extra that we're winding up with on our canvas. So we'll obviously have to paint right over where the eye goes, but if you go light enough, you might be able to see it, or even if we take a little extra white and just put a streak over it, that way we'll be able to tell exactly where it goes. And once you get to the ears, I would say be really careful and maybe leave the middle of the ear left alone so that we can kind of tell exactly where it is. We'll be outlining it with a little bit of black. We'll mix that with our gray to make a darker gray. But I would just suggest adding, leaving the little inside of the ear right here. You could leave that pink for now to make sure that we know exactly what it means. All right, so now that I've got it outlined, now I have it outlined. I'm going to stick this brush back in my water. I'm gonna take my larger brush again, or I guess not again, for the first time, and I'm gonna get a good blob of gray on there and start filling in. Now, as you're doing this, I would suggest taking some of your white alongside the gray and blend a little bit of that in, especially in this part of his face where there's no color behind it, right? Start to streak it in. That way, it'll already be nice and light for when we want to go and add more white. It'll already be light enough. I'm going to leave the ear a little bit darker. So I'm going to avoid that part for now. Start lightening up everything else. And it's up to you how dark or light you'd like to make it. I think I'm going to go for a little bit of a darker gray than on this one. If you're doing this with some friends, you could all pick a different shade of gray and make it a whole pack of wolves, right? Just filling everything in. Streaking my white in as well. I might pull out my smaller brush again to go around the bottom of the ear. I think it'll make it a little easier than trying to use the larger bristles. So now, I'm going to go ahead and keep adding in some extra white. Wherever you really feel like you want to add some in. As I said before, I think I'm going to keep mine a little bit darker this time than our example I have next to me here. But we'll see. I may get carried away. I'm keeping my brush strokes really nice and loose so that it looks nice and fuzzy like fur. Keeping them kind of short and flowing so it doesn't look stiff. Now I'm going to go into the ear and add maybe just a little on the top of it. I think it'll be nice to have a darker underside to the ear, like a shadow. Perfect. All right. I'm just going to go back in with my little brush and fill in any little pockets that didn't get filled in. I see a little bit of space in between. So I'm just going to fill in those little holes where the paint underneath has already started to dry. There we go. I think that's good enough for now. If you want to add any white in, I would wait a little while. What you're going to notice is that the paint underneath is going to start drying, and your brush will actually start to pull and remove that paint from your canvas. So we want to make sure that we let it dry enough that it's not tacky or sticky anymore and going to pull off our canvas. So I'm going to set this aside again, let it dry for just a couple of minutes. We don't need to wait nearly as long as for the background. And I'm going to get my next color ready, which is going to be our black. So you can pull your black out now and put it on the side of your canvas. On the side of your paper plate, your palette. So I'm going to set this up here. You guys can see now. I've got my wolf nice and grayed in. I might add, like I said, a little bit more white afterwards, but we'll see how it looks when it's dry. So we'll take a couple minutes here and we'll be back again. Alright, we are back again. I'm going to remove my canvas from my easel once again. I've pulled out my black, so our next step is going to be taking, finally, our little tiny detail brush, and I'm going to be mixing up a nice, darker gray than what we had before. So I'm going to take a little bit of gray and just a little bit of our black. We don't want to use all of it because we will need some of that black for the eye. So we don't want to use quite all of it, but we do want to use enough to darken our gray quite a bit so that it's really different from the gray that we've been using before. Kind of a nice charcoal color. So with that, I'm going to take it and we're going to add some for his nose. We're going to build in the nose, build in the middle of the ear, and do some shadows. So I'm going to start off with his little nose right up on the top here. I might turn my canvas a little bit so I don't end up pushing down too hard on it. And I think looking at it, I'm going to take a little extra black just to make sure that it is really different and noticeable. I'm going to take that little tiny brush and very carefully start building in my nose. Just like that. So now I'm going to take that same color and fill in the inside of the ear and do just a little bit of outlining around the ear itself so that we are able to really tell the difference between the ear and the side of his neck here. So I'm just going to do a line for the top, nice and skinny, and one on the bottom, also really nice and skinny. Just like that. Now before we do the eye, I'm going to ask you guys to wash off your brush. We're going to take just a tiny little bit of white, hopefully there still is some left on your palette. And we're just going to add in his little tooth right here, just to make sure it's nice and white. Just like that. And add just a little dark gray outline to make sure we keep his mouth really nice and separate from the moon. Just like that. Alright, we are finally here at our last step. We are going to be adding in our wolf's eye. So we're just going to take our little skinny liner brush, our teeny tiny brush. We're going to get some black on there and very carefully add in that little arch. Could add a little eyelash on the end of it if you'd like. But I think this is just about finished. The last thing I'm going to do before we head out of here is take that liner brush again, and using one of your leftover colors, we recommend probably either your gray or your black. I think I'll use some gray since I have quite a bit of that left. You're going to sign your initials on one of the bottom corners. I'm going to write HAS for Hammar's Art Studio. That's usually how we sign them here. So I'm going to do that right down in this little corner. This way everyone knows whose masterpiece this is. Excellent. Alright everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and joining us. We really hope you enjoyed following along our painting tutorial. As I said at the beginning of the video, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends. We'll be posting more in the near future, so stay tuned. We really hope to see you either in the studio or online very soon. We've got some really awesome, exciting Christmas stuff coming up, some holiday events, both online and in studio. So check out our website, hammarsartstudio.com. for more information. Thank you guys again for joining in. I had a really great time and I hope you did as well. We'll see you again soon.